We're back after a week on the rubber chicken circuit last week. Blair and I were in Lawrence speaking to a class. I got over to Columbia to speak to a class. So we're here with our footing again. And Blair, obviously the thing that's still the hottest story in town is the Royals. And now the complication in this hot story is the starting rotation, but particularly with Danny Duffy right now. What's going on with Danny?
If it was just one start, maybe you'd dismiss it as the bad start, which I guess what we did with his previous start,
right, yeah.
Against Cleveland at home. But this is 2 in a row, and that second inning against the Rangers in the series opener was just painful to watch. He couldn't get the breaking ball over. It seemed like he could spot the fastball all right, but that breaking ball slider had so much trouble with that pitch, and it seemed like it was always landing at the hitter's back leg, the right-handed hitter's back leg. So that's the big issue for Danny Duffy, and it's a big issue for the Royals right now too. Danny's got to get fixed, and he has to get fixed because I don't know what the alternatives are for the Royals in the rotation if he continues to pitch this way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the thoughts we've had in the early season is that, boy, the Royals sure have been able to sustain injuries and sustain suspensions and oddities, but you can only sustain it so long. One last thing about Danny himself, that the guy I've seen in the brief year and a half, 2 years that I've been here has not been this guy. Now, I understand that was the type of stuff that marked his early career, and that you could see these wild inconsistencies. I thought he was past that last year. He was the best left-handed starter in the American League for a lot of the season. Do you get to a point where you wonder how much of this is psychological? Obviously, the stuff still seems to be there. That he's got velocity, and how much more rope can you give him before he just needs to get worked on differently?
Well, and I do think it's all upstairs because he insists that he's not injured, that he came off of last year's injury that limited his postseason. He's back 100%. So I trust him when he says it's not a physical thing. It's mechanical, it's mental, whatever.
Yeah.
It's something that he and Dave Island, the pitching coach, are just going to have to figure out. How much longer do you give him? Well, I mean, he's going to make his start on Saturday against the Yankees. At least that's, he's in the probables, so we expect him to start this Saturday. So I think we'll all be curious to see how he throws in his next start. And you just really hope for his sake and the Royals' sake that he's got it worked out. Because, like I said earlier, they've already moved Chris Young into the rotation.
Right.
He's taken Jason Vargas' spot. I believe he's going to pitch Friday in the opener against the Yankees. So I don't know what the alternative is. I've heard some suggest go to the send him to the bullpen and let him work out. Well, who do you bring up from the bullpen, or who's
right.
Do you pitch do you bring Finnegan back? I don't know what the answer is. There's not an easy one.
No, there's not. Well, as we talk about Danny Duffy, who I have sort of felt like is my favorite player. I'm too old to have favorite players, but I've sort of felt like that since I got here because I just think of him as so real. It gets me thinking about something we were talking about as we were getting ready today, which is just as you get to know these people that you cover particularly when you're a beat writer. Jeff Warren is on our mind, the former Missouri basketball player, and Blair and I each had a chance to write a little bit about him over the last couple of days. And Blair, there's some guys I think that make an impact on you because not because they're a great player. Jeff was a really good player, but because of who they are and maybe even what we learned from them. I assume, and I know, in fact, that you were struck by a lot of guys you covered on various beats over the years. What's the nature of that kind of relationship?
I think in our job, and anybody who covers a team, anybody who's involved in the media, you don't find yourself pulling for teams as much as you do feeling good about certain athletes, and let's be honest, it's usually the ones that have react well to you.
Well, that's right.
Have some understanding of what our
right.
job is and what they're doing, or just are good-natured,
right.
Because that's who they are. And Jeff Warren was certainly one of those guys. And we come across him at every team that we cover: the Chiefs and Royals and the college teams, Sporting KC. Everybody, high school coaches. There are all kinds of people in that profession who you just find yourself drawn to, and maybe go as far as say you pull for just because of who they are. And that's what I thought about when I heard about Jeff Warren. He was just a guy who, whether or not you were a Missouri fan or you pulled for those wonderful teams in the early '90s, those Anthony Peeler. Just think about the teams that he played with: Doug Smith, and then Anthony Peeler, and then Javon Crudup. So he was the bridge to a lot of good Missouri teams. I just found myself thinking what a good guy he was, how much fun he was to deal with.
Yeah, and I always felt that way. And Jeff was the consummate Norm Stewart player, and Blair pointed out very eloquently, bridged sort of a little generation, which arguably is one of the peak times in Missouri basketball history, and he was the X factor. As we start to round off the show, one last thought is on sort of the opposite of this kind of feeling, which is the real anger that the Patriots have, one way or another, created in the wake of Deflategate. And Blair and I were both struck by how many different ways you can look at this, and how some people think this is the completely overreaching penalties, and others think you can't do enough to them because they're the Patriots. How do you think we're going to look back on this set of penalties in time?
I think that's really maybe the most important thing is how we'll look at what is the dominant franchise of the free agency era of the NFL. 4 Super Bowls in 15 years, and arguably the greatest quarterback, certainly of this era, and in the conversation for the greatest quarterback of all time. And now they're having to deal, once they get through the punishment phase of this, and I personally think that the 4 games will get reduced to 2. I just do. They're going to lose the draft pick, the draft picks, and the fine stands, although the Patriots are beside themselves. You ought to read Robert Kraft's statement on this. He is really upset as the wagons are being circled in New England. I maybe because of my nature, I kind of look at how are we going to look at the Patriots, in a rearview mirror because of this. I do think it's going to taint them a little bit. We are going to look at them maybe differently than we looked at the Montana 49ers or the Bradshaw Steelers, and maybe put a little asterisk by the Patriots. They had to, between this and Spygate, they had to bend the rules a little bit to get it done.
Yeah, and maybe other people are doing it too, but they're getting caught, and that may have something to do with the nature of the penalties here too. And who's to say that's wrong? I mean, once you're seen as somebody skirting the rules, I think that has an impact on how you're perceived from there. Well, I think that's about it for this week. Before we go, a shout out to one of the 2 friends of the show we have, Jack Dodd, who is finishing up high school this week. Jack, stay faithful to the show. We'll find out later whether you made it this far in. And please check us out on kansascity.com for all of our coverage on everything Kansas City. Thanks for being with us.